everyone. My name is Samuel Abrahami. Today I will be going over my presentation, which is a topic of techniques of modern attacks. And in this presentation, I will be talking about the different type of modern cyber attacks that have been going on in today's day of age, so we could be more aware of these type of situations. The problem statement for this area of techniques of modern attacks is that many people aren't that familiar with it, and that can make them easily vulnerable to these type of attacks. In my opinion, I believe that the people from the previous generation are most vulnerable because they didn't grow up with all of this type of technology and they don't know how it works. I wouldn't think anyone in our class would have these type of issues because this is one of our areas of focus and we should be very familiar with it. But even still, it's still possible for people to get these different type of cyber attacks towards them, even though if you have a familiarity with them. Like just based off of the next bullet, we saw that in the year of 2016 that cyber activity costed the US economy around 57 to 109 billion dollars, and that's a huge amount of money. And I wouldn't personally believe that all of that money came from people who weren't familiar with these different type of cyber attacks. So it shows us that even people who are familiar with all of this cyber activity or cyber attacks, that they are still vulnerable of it. Another thing is that these type of cyber attacks, it's very possible you wouldn't even be aware of them even happening to you. So we have to make sure that people become more familiar with these type of cyber attacks. My contribution towards this presentation was that I researched some of the most common different type of modern cyber attacks that go on today, and I would like to present to you guys possible ways for us to defend ourselves against these type of attacks. So some of the modern cyber attacks I would like to go over with you guys is one is phishing, ransomware, cryptojacking, and medical cyber attacks. For some of you guys, some of these will look familiar to you, and you will tell me like, Sam, some of these aren't that modern, they seem like very old. But in truth is that some of these old cyber attacks still happen today. So I would like to present this to people so we become more aware of them. So the first cyber attack that I would like to go over with you guys is phishing. And for many of you, you may be familiar with phishing, but for those who aren't, phishing is a method for a adversary that they could portray to you like fake information that somebody else would think is real, and they would put in their sensitive information in this link, let's say, and the adversary would take over all of that credentials. A great example of this would be a adversary, they sent you some sort of link and it seems like a trusted link, and however it really wasn't. And when you go in that link and you enter, let's say, your login information, that adversary will get that information and it wouldn't be used for what it was supposedly meant to be used. Um, Something really interesting about phishing, I would say, is that it's probably very simple to do. It's one of the most common type of cyber attacks to happen, and it's really not that hard to do. And there's multiple ways to do the phishing. You could have deceptive phishing, which one would be pretending to be some type of like company or something that seems to look legitimate, but it's really not. And the adversary's goal is for you to go on this malicious link. Another one would be spear phishing. It's the same concept as deceptive phishing. However, they have more information about you, and they pretend that this certain type of malicious file is meant for you because they said certain information about you that might be private. And another one, there's many other more, but in my opinion, the most interesting one is farming, because farming involves a little bit more complexity involved. And what goes on here is that, let's say you were trying to go to some type of URL, And when you go to that URL, you have to go to something known as a domain name server, also known as DNS. So what the adversary could do is that they could take control of that DNS and change the IP address of it. And once that IP address is changed towards whatever they want, they could change that domain name server to something else that would be very similar to what the user is trying to go on, and the user would enter their information and the adversary will get all of that. So there's many different ways to do phishing, and it's something that I would like to everyone to be aware of how possible it is to happen. So certain ways to defend yourselves against phishing is number one, I would say, is to really check the domain name of the link you are on. In my opinion, this applies mostly to farming type of phishing because you could check on the URL you're on if it's certified or not. And if for some reason that the URL you're on is certified, there's a possibility you might be on a dangerous type of URL. Another one is as this is one of the most obvious ones, is to really be careful and analyze emails sent to you for being a imposter that wants to really send you a malicious URL. You have to you want to make sure that the information that's being sent to you is valid and not something fake. And another thing which is very important to have is to make sure you have your internet service provider has a very good type of anti-spam or anti-phishing type of software, so you could avoid against certain type of phishing attacks. So the idea of ransomware, which is a different type of cyber attack, is where a adversary, they pretty much take control over your files on your system. And what they really do is they just hide that information. They keep it away from you. And in order for you to get that information back is they demand money from you, and that's usually how ransomware works. What's really incredible about ransomware is that it can cost companies of hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I believe one of the most expensive ransomware that ever happened was it costed like $500,000. And this actually happened in Florida. Um, so what's actually really also interesting about ransomware is that people that do ransomware, they tend to attack big companies because these type of companies, they have very important information, and they would be willing to pay that huge sum amount of money in order to get that information back. So a really famous type of ransomware is known as WannaCry. So what WannaCry is pretty much what it would do, I should say, is that it will, if the user clicks on the link or downloads this ransomware known as WannaCry, it will encrypt all of your files and the user wouldn't be able to get that files back. So the only way that the user would be able to get those files back is if they pay the ransom, which is the demand of money that the owner of WannaCry wants to do, and they have to pay that money by a certain date. And if the user didn't pay that sum of money by that date, the ransom price would double. And if the user still didn't pay that amount of money, what the ransomware would do is they would delete all of your files and you will never be able to get them back. So this is one of the most famous type of ransomwares that went on for a really long time. So on a technical aspect of how this ransomware WannaCry worked is the first of all, I should say the reason why I'm going into this technical aspect of this type of ransomware is because it deals with a lot of what we learned in class. So regarding of how the files were encrypted, it was that it would use a RSA and the AES cryptographic type of libraries, which is something we've learned about in class. And I thought that was something very interesting to share with everyone. Another thing is that the way you would be able to decrypt your files is that it would use something known as the SHA-256, which is also a really hot topic that people were really interested in our class. And fun fact about the SHA-256 is that it was originally created by the NSA, and the makers of WannaCry really got that information somehow. It leaked out from the NSA. So this is just something nice I thought would be to share with everybody. So the best way to really defend yourself against a ransomware is number one, always back up your files no matter what. Because let's say if you did get attacked by a ransomware, you shouldn't really pay it, even if your files were backed up, let's say, because assuming right that you had the ransomware and they tell you to pay a certain amount of money, there's no guarantee that once you pay the money that they will decrypt your files or you'll get that information back. They may just ask you for more money. And another thing I would say, which is very like obvious in my opinion, is that be careful what type of software or link you go on that could sound very malicious. But overall, I would say the most important thing to do for ransomware is really to always back up your files somewhere else, so you could always have them safe. The next type of modern cyber attack I would like to talk about is cryptojacking. So the main reason I chose this as my next topic is because going back to ransomware, majority of these ransomwares would want their ransom to be paid within cryptocurrency, also known as Bitcoin or Ethereum or other types. So people, like as we know, one of the hottest areas now is probably cryptocurrency, and a lot of people trying to get their hands on it. And some ways people try to get their hands on it is very illegal. What it really does, cryptojacking, is that you're trying to mine cryptocurrency on someone else's device. And the reason why this is done is because in order to mine this cryptocurrency, it takes up a lot of electricity and it could possibly cost a lot of money. So instead of doing it on your device, why not just do it on somebody else? Or even better, why not just do it on someone else's device and they wouldn't even be aware of this at all? Which is very common with cryptojacking because nothing very malicious is going on with cryptojacking. All you're doing is really mining cryptocurrency on someone else's device. So it'd be very hard for someone to be aware of them being under cryptojacking. Another thing is that people who tend to do cryptojacking, they really aim to do this from big famous companies because they use very excellent type of software, or like they have very good type of computers, and it'll be much better to do cryptojacking. um, Something very interesting was that cryptojacking was actually done under Tesla, and they obviously found out about it, but I think it was just such a smart idea to do because Tesla is known for their electronics, their electricity that they use. So you could probably mine a lot of cryptocurrency within their facilities type of devices. So the defense for cryptojacking, I wouldn't really consider this defense because, as again, it's very hard to be aware of you being under cryptojacking since nothing very malicious is happening to your device. However, symptoms, I guess you could say, you could call it, for cryptojacking is if your device is running slow, because with mining pretty much for cryptocurrency, you're going to be taking a lot of CPU of the device, and your device will start running slow. So that could be one idea of how cryptojacking is happening. Another thing could be having the proper ad block on your browser, because sometimes you could have a pop-up that comes and that could run some type of script on your device, and that could already start cryptojacking. And obviously, as I mentioned for the previous cyber attacks, it's really to make sure that any link you're going on is safe before you go on it. So the last is modern cyber attack I would like to go over with you guys is medical cyber attacks. In my opinion, when I first learned about this, which I believe was 2 years ago, this is something like really shocking because most people wouldn't think cyber attacks would happen in the medical field because it's just something unheard of. Well, what does a medical have to do with a cyber attack? What's really also interesting, I guess, from a medical cyber attacks is that most cyber attacks, their goal is to make money. However, regarding medical cyber attacks, that isn't really the goal. The goal is more of like killing a person or like causing damage towards them, and that's just something really crazy. So during my internship 2 years ago, I interned at the Air Force Research Laboratory. I had the opportunity to attend a Black Hat conference. And what goes on in the Black Hat conference, it talks about the most up-to-date type of cyber attacks that go on. and one of them was like dealing with obviously the cyber attacks in regards to the medical field. And one of the presenters, he was showing us how like he was able to take a MRI and pretty much take control over it. Like you would see him playing video games on a MRI, which is unheard of. Why would anybody do that? Something else, if you want to take it even to another level, right? This presenter also showed us how he was able to take control over a pacemaker, and he was able to like, if he wanted to, he could end somebody's life because he had control of a pacemaker. And another thing, which is kind of like self-evident in my opinion, it was really being able to access information of the patient's files, because back in the day you obviously didn't have the cloud or databases, everything was physical. But as we move into the modern day of age, these things, all of this information tend to be within databases or in a cloud. And this could be a way for an adversary to get this type of sensitive information. So this is my personal opinion of how to defend ourselves against medical attacks. The first one would be regarding the medical devices that we use for patients, is they should be fully tested for any possible type of breach towards that device or system, because you're putting somebody's life on the line by using that medical device, and you want to make sure that everything is safe. So proper testing should be done for that. Regarding the patient's files that are in a database or cloud, is it's very simple that you should have like proper security and defense towards these databases or cloud, so nobody can go and penetrate it and steal that type of information. In conclusion, we have to come and understand that there are many different types of cyber attacks that could happen in many different type of forms. As I mentioned before, you could have them in phishing, you could have them in cryptojacking, ransomware, or even like a cyber medical attacks. They all come in different ways. The main thing we have to gain from this presentation is to be aware of these type of cyber attacks and really know how to defend ourselves against it. And in order for us to defend ourselves, we really have to take the proper precautions towards these type of situations, because if we don't take precautions, we make ourselves vulnerable towards it. And this is something that I am really passionate about, that we have to be really careful about. I would like to end off this presentation by saying thank you so much for watching this entire presentation, and I wish you guys a wonderful day. I would like to now guys show you guys my references that I use for this presentation. Thank you so much and all the best.